Hey guys, it's Mike. So, I'm recording this video on the same day that I did the second part of A Study in Scarlet, meaning the second chapter of A Study in Scarlet. But I decided that I wanted to record another video. It may not be released on the exact same day as episode 3 of Mike Reads, but just know that I'm recording it on the same day. That's why I'm wearing the same clothes, and it doesn't matter because, hey, washing machines exist and I could be wearing this shirt at a different point in time. But I wanted you to know that I am recording this on the same day. But with that said, you're probably wondering, Mike, recording 2 videos in one day? What do you mean? Well, I decided that I wanted to read something that I wrote. And this is something that's a little bit more, shall we say, heavy than what I've been reading to you so far. This is a philosophical paper that I wrote. And when I was in college, I took a handful of philosophy courses, one of which was a philosophy of religion class. Now, I will put some content warnings down in the bio, down there, because I also put content warnings at the front of this paper when I wrote it. And this paper is the final paper that I wrote for my philosophy of religion class during my last semester of college at Slippery Rock University. And I wrote it for, like I said, I wrote it for class for one of my all-time favorite professors. And this paper is called The Trial of God versus God on Trial, comparing and contrasting two different versions of Elie Wiesel's personal experience within the walls of Auschwitz. Now, like I said, this is heavy. This is a philosophical paper. This is also kind of a history paper in some ways. During the Second World War and before the Second World War, the German army committed terrible atrocities, and the German civilians created terrible atrocities against its Jewish population. And as a result of that, there was something that's now known as the Holocaust. What does that have to do with a philosophy paper? Well, you may not be familiar with Elie Wiesel, but he was a Holocaust survivor. He was at one of the most brutal concentration camps that the Germans ran, called Auschwitz. And luckily he made it out alive and wrote a book called Night. But he also wrote a stage play, which hasn't really been put on except maybe once. And it's called The Trial of God. It's a very good play. It's very sad. It's very heavy, for lack of a better word. And I own a copy of it. I've read it. And I read it for class, for my philosophy class, so that I could compare it and contrast it to a BBC PBS drama series called God on Trial, which is, in both of which, the stage play and the docudrama are dramatic / theatrical retellings of something that actually happened to Wiesel during his imprisonment at Auschwitz. And what that was somebody who Wiesel knew and somebody that he did secret prayer with in the concentration camp, took him to a secret clandestine meeting in the dead of night in the camp where 3 rabbis, I believe, put God on trial for the crime of abandoning his chosen people. That's very sobering. And this paper that I wrote talks about this. Now, I will read, and as you can tell, this is a very different mood for this video. It's very serious. There's nothing funny here, and I'll most likely be limiting comments on here because, and by that I mean I won't turn comments off. I want philosophical discourse. But if I see anything that warrants deleting a comment or reporting a comment, I will do so. Because this is a serious topic. This is a sobering topic. It's somber, and it is not to be joked about. And quite frankly, I won't tolerate it. So, with that being said, I'll read the content warning, and then I will start reading the paper. Content warning. This paper deals with not only the Jewish Holocaust carried out by the Nazis during the Second World War, but the pogroms carried out by anti-Semitic Christians during the Middle Ages. In the section discussing Elie Wiesel's stage play, The Trial of God, there are mentions of these pogroms as well as torture, murder, and rape. Both the stage play and the film, God on Trial, deal with topics of religion and the denouncing of religion, hatred, and anti-Semitism. While the author would wholeheartedly suggest reading the play and watching the film as a way of preparing for reading this paper, or even doing so after reading the paper, viewer and reading discretion for the play, movie, and paper is advised. Thank you. And before I start reading, I will say copies of Wiesel's stage play, The Trial of God, is available on Amazon with great introductions and afterwards, and the docudrama God on Trial is available on YouTube, free to watch. It is not. And I say that because we watched it in class, and it's kind of hard to make out the words sometimes. Subtitles generated by YouTube for the video aren't the best, but that's because I believe it's a type of artificial intelligence generating the auto-generated captions. So I will start reading now. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 6. The Torah, Old Testament. For thousands of years, these words above have provided comfort to the Jewish people as they made their way throughout their daily lives, good times and bad. During the Second World War, countless numbers of Jews were gathered up by the Nazis and sent to concentration camps. It was in camps like the infamous Auschwitz that they were made to work, be experimented on, and in many cases put to death. Auschwitz survivor and author Elie Wiesel, whose book Night told his story of imprisonment and eventual liberation from the camp, recalls one such instance in particular. One night, he was brought into a room where 3 rabbis held a secret meeting. Their purpose, putting their God on trial. The crime, abandoning his chosen people and allowing their extermination. This would inspire Wiesel to write the script for a stage play called The Trial of God, as it was held on February 25th, 1649, in Shamgarad, in the year 1979. Inspired by the script of the play, screenwriter Frank Cottrell Boyce wrote the 2008 film God on Trial for television in the United Kingdom, which would later be broadcasted in the United States on PBS stations. In this paper, I will be exploring the stories of both the stage play and the film, comparing the similarities the 2 pieces share, and looking at the differences each have. I will do these tasks by going through the plots and themes of the stage play and the film, having read and watched each respectively. One may ask, why write such a heavy topic as the Jewish Holocaust, especially when the writer is not Jewish? Surely this topic has been discussed enough. I would argue rather firmly that the Jewish Holocaust is still and always will be relative in history and be more than worthy of discussion, especially when there are still very prominent anti-Semitic sentiments in our world. As someone who has an interest in history and philosophy, and as someone who was raised in a Protestant Christian background, I feel it is important as a fellow human being with a heart and conscience to recognize injustice in the world and to fight it. Both the film and the play introduce philosophic issues through their stories, and I will endeavor to discuss them to the best of my abilities as a layman. Let us first start by examining Wiesel's The Trial of God. Based on his personal experiences, but set in the mid-1600s, the play takes place in the fictional Ukrainian village of Shamgarad on February 25th, 1649. This day was also the day before the Jewish holiday of Purim. Now, for reference, Purim is the holiday that celebrates Queen Esther and Mordecai's saving of the Jews from annihilation. There is a sad irony in this, as a year prior to the start of the play, there was a pogrom carried out by anti-Semitic Christians that wiped out all but 2 Jews in Shamgarad. A pogrom is a violent riot whose purpose is the killing of an ethnic or religious group. Wiesel's story starts with the arrival of 3 traveling Jewish actors to the tavern in Shamgarad on Purim Eve, looking to be served drinks in celebration of the holiday. They are unaware of the pogrom that had previously occurred at first, and that the innkeeper Berish and his daughter Hannah are the only 2 surviving Jews in town. Having no money, the actors look to pay for their drinks by putting on skits concerning Purim, which praise God for saving the Jews from death. Berish furiously demands no mention of God in his tavern, but ultimately allows them to put on a trial, with the actors as the judges and himself as prosecutor, accusing and condemning God for the death and destruction of his friends and family. Berish accuses God of abandoning his chosen people, Berish himself, and Hannah, his daughter. He holds God personally responsible and is certain God is guilty. The audience to the trial is Berish's bartender Maria. The local Christian priest warns against such a trial, even in farce, and offers to save Berish and Hannah so long as they renounce their faith and pledge an allegiance to Jesus Christ, whom the Christians believed to be the Messiah. Berish, who once saw the priest as a friend, rejects this so-called help and demands the trial continue. The one problem is that the members of the trial cannot find someone to defend God against the court. Eventually, another customer in the bar, who was previously unseen by the others, for he was sitting in the shadows, says that he will defend God. He is called Sam, and it is revealed that Maria had a relationship with him briefly. He goes through the role of defense attorney, questioning Maria and Barish, and even wanting to question Hannah, which the judges also want to do. Barish is adamant about this, that it should not be done. During the pogrom a year before, when Barish's family was murdered, Hannah's fiancé was also killed. Hannah was tortured and raped, and Barish was made to watch. It is revealed that Barish demanded a trial against God on Hannah's behalf, who's become altered mentally and emotionally as a result of the attacks carried out against her. The play ends with the threat of imminent anti-Semitic Christians at the door of the tavern, finally ready to finish what they had started a year ago. The actors suggest, in a last-ditch effort, to don Purim masks, and they do. Sam dons one as well, and they begin to beg him for help, for they believe him to be holy at this point. Sam reveals himself to be Satan. Laughing at their naivete, he stands as the final candle goes out. Lights on stage go black just as the door to the tavern is thrown open, and the blackness engulfs all. The sound of bloody roars are heard. The curtain drops, and the play is over. I would like to take a moment to say that when I originally read this play, there was a bad taste in my mouth, but a bad taste which I had anticipated. For a play based on the Holocaust and the anti-Semitic pogroms of the Middle Ages, I'd not expected a happy ending, but I was shocked at the violence alluded to at the end of the play. On a similarly somber and dark note, let us turn our attention now to the film by Cottrell Boyce. As previously mentioned, the screenwriter was influenced by Wiesel's play, but Cottrell Boyce took a more literal approach. Instead of a trial within a play, the Cottrell Boyce film focused on the actual trial that Wiesel was a party to. Set in Auschwitz concentration camp, the film starts with the processing of Jewish inmates by a Nazi doctor, presumably the notorious Joseph Mengele, and SS troopers. When returned to their barracks, new inmates join them. One of the inmates, Mochi, at some point rather angrily suggests putting God on trial for allowing such a thing to happen, the imprisonment and murdering of the Jews. Two men volunteer as judges, Baumgarten, a former professor of law, as head judge, and Schmidt, a rabbi, is the second judge. A man called Mordecai volunteers as inquisitor against God, much to the dismay of his devout Jewish father, Kuhn. As the film continues, the Jews in the barracks hold this trial against God, where many different theodicies are brought up as to why God would allow the Nazis to treat them this way. Halfway during the trial, the SS troopers round up the new arrivals to process them into everyday life in the camp, which includes stripping them of their clothes and shaving their heads and facial hair if they were men. This greatly affects two of the newcomers in particular. They are Idek, Schmidt's former pupil, and Akiba, a rabbi. Idek had been called on by Schmidt as a witness to God's defense, being knowledgeable of the Torah and Jewish history, and when initially called forward, Idek was willing and perhaps eager to defend his God, but after the Nazis processed him and fully made him a prisoner of Auschwitz, he lost the passion to do so. He was in tears while trying to quote history and scripture. Akiba went through a similar change. When first brought to the camp, he was constantly in prayer to God, and as he had memorized the Torah, was the trial's living Torah for reference to the case. After he was processed with the rest of the prisoners, he stopped praying, and not long after the judges found God guilty of breaking his covenant with the Jewish people, Akiba provides one more final theodicy or argument: that while God may be all-powerful, he is not all good. Not long after Akiba finishes this argument, the SS troopers return to gather the prisoners who had been previously processed at the beginning of the film. Kuhn makes a deal with one of the inmates who acts as a guard so that he is taken instead of his son Mordecai. Kuhn, along with Schmidt and Baumgarten, who it is revealed didn't know he was Jewish until the Nazis came for him, and many other Jews are led to gas chambers. The final scene shows the men praying as they face their death. That was a lot of heart-wrenching information, back to back, and I would suggest, if you haven't already, to take a short break to reflect and allow yourself a moment to come together. If I may say so in my own language, this is a very heavy topic. Please take what time you need. Now we can continue, and let's do so by examining the similarities the play and the film share. The most obvious is that both pieces of media deal with a trial that holds God accountable for crimes against the Jewish people, both of which were inspired by Wiesel's own personal experience in Auschwitz. Both the play and the film deal with attacks on the Jewish people, the pogroms of the Middle Ages, and the Jewish Holocaust, which took place during the Second World War. Both film and play have theodicies in them. The most notable one is the belief that God is not a good being. In the play, this is brought up by Berish. In the film, it is the Rabbi Akiba who bitterly comes to the conclusion that God was only ever on the side of the Jewish people, but that God was never good to begin with. Berish provides evidence from his personal experience. He cites the death of his family members and his friends, and the torture of his daughter as examples to build his case. Akiba provides examples of God's treatment of the Jews by citing the Torah and history, and saying that God is strong, that he is on the side of the Jews, and destroyed the enemies of the Jews, but that he was never good. This was evident by his citing how God sent the Jews into Egypt by causing a famine. The Egyptians enslaved the Jews, and God sent famine and plagues and darkness and killed the firstborn of the Egyptians so that the Jews would be set free. And even when they were freed, God drowned the pursuing Egyptians in the Red Sea. Even after that, Akiba argues that God continued to show signs that he was not good by demanding that people die who questioned the might of him or his chosen people. Again, God was on their side, but he was never a good God. At this point, we can now focus on the differences of the two pieces of media. One of the most obvious is the fact that Wiesel shared his own personal experiences through a story that could have come right out of history, and was inspired by what he lived through and by what Jews in the past have had to live through, if they were lucky enough. The film by Cottrell Boyce is more literal, offering a dramatized retelling of the actual trial. The big differences are the different theodicies that are shared throughout the film. We've already talked about the concept that God is not good, so we can start looking at the others. The first two are shared by the character Kuhn, who starts by saying that what is happening to the Jews in the concentration camps is a test sent by God to see if they are his chosen people, are good Jews. At this point, the one judge, Baumgarten, asks if tests were included in the covenant. Kuhn, in response to this, says that the Jews are being punished for their sins. This argument made by Kuhn is fueled by personal bias, as he is angry for his son for having left the community and living a secular life prior to being rounded up by the Nazis. Schmidt, the rabbi and second judge, says that what the Nazis are doing to the Jews is a purification of the people, one that is painful in the moment but is necessary. He also, along with his former pupil Idek, says that God has allowed for human beings to make their own choices with the gift of free will. The character Liebel doesn't agree with the argument of free will. When the Nazis gathered his sons, two of whom were twins, an SS trooper said that he could have his choice of one son to save. Liebel says he doesn't have a choice, and if I recall correctly, it is implied he saved the youngest, which was also the weakest. His twin sons were presumably handed over to Mengele, who like to experiment on twins. Liebel offers the theodicy that God is not all-powerful and that he suffers with us. The first half of this suggests that God is powerless to stop the Nazis from carrying out such horrific actions. The second half, in which God suffers with us, is touched upon in Hans Jonas's paper, The Concept of God After Auschwitz, A Jewish Voice. In this paper, Jonas offers up a myth of his own devising, which says that God gave up divinity to enter into the world as a way of being able to experience life through mortal beings. As such, he would suffer with human beings during hard times, and as such, he would grow as a result of the suffering just as humans do. Just before the verdict is delivered and Akiba gives his testimony against God, Schmidt says that we cannot fathom the mind of God. That very well may be true, but it should be asked, if God is supposed to be all-loving, all-caring, and all-powerful, why would God allow such atrocities to occur? It could also be asked of him today as well. Having summarized the trial of God and God on trial, as well as comparing the similarities and examining the differences presented in both the play and the film, I will now attempt to draw a conclusion. As has been done before in history, difficult conversations and heavy subject matter are presented to us as an audience through modes of entertainment, in this case through a play and a film. As philosophers, we look at the subject matter provided, the anti-Semitic pogroms and the Jewish Holocaust, and we ask why God would let such horrible events happen. If we say that the Judeo-Christian Islamic God does not exist, then we do not have to worry about these issues from a theistic perspective, as it becomes an issue of the evil carried out by human beings against themselves, and nothing more. But say that such a God does exist, and that such a God does call the Jews his chosen people. Why then did God break the covenant he made with his people and abandon them to the pogroms carried out by anti-Semitic Christians and the Holocaust enforced by the Nazi Party? If such a God does exist, then the questions and theodicies raised in the play and the film not only become relevant to ask, but I would argue necessary. Does God truly love and care for his children? Does he have the power to stop things from occurring or to put a stop to them as they unfold in real time? Is God a good God? I'm not sure if we can ever know the answer to these questions for certain in this form of life, unless God were to break his silence and tell us himself. But I believe we are entitled to our own opinions on the matter. Barish, the main character from the play, has his opinions on the matter, as do the different prisoners from the film. I have an opinion on the matter too. As I've mentioned from the start of this film, I was raised a Protestant Christian. I was raised in a loving household and taught that our God, who we share with the Jews, is a loving and caring God. As I grew up in a world ravaged by war after the September 11, 2001 terror attacks, I started to see that we live in a world that is imperfect. Among with other questions I had as I grew, I asked how God could let such terrible things happen to all of his children. I still ask that question today. There are, of course, the theodicies brought up in the film. It could all be a test, or we're being punished for our sins, etc. If we look at questions asked by people during the pogroms, the Holocaust, and today, we start to notice a pattern with the questions being asked. I do believe in God, and I believe that he is all-powerful. I believe he is able to do anything he sets his mind to, if he decides to set his mind to it. But I believe that he has set his mind on letting us defend for ourselves, so much so that his chosen people, the Jews, have suffered during their history, most terribly during the pogroms and the Holocaust. I look at the world today, and it seems that if that it is godless, or more specifically, lacking the intervention of God. One looks at the wars between Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Palestine, and one wonders why such a loving, caring, and all-powerful God would let his children be slaughtered over political and religious differences. The same could be said about the Crusades of old. My opinion, for what it's worth, is that God is all-powerful, but I do not think he is all-loving. I do not think he is all-caring. I do not believe God is all good, if he was ever good to begin with. A God of such power, who it would seem has chosen not to stop the near death and destruction of his chosen people and the rest of his children in the world, cannot be all-loving, all-caring, or good in any aspect of the word. With all these things said, and to quote the rock opera Jesus Christ Superstar, I don't know how to love him. How can I love a God who allows horrible things to happen to all of his children without intervention, the concept of free will aside? I do not know if Elie Wiesel believed if God broke his covenant with the Jews. The rabbis that originally held the trial certainly believed there was reasonable doubt. In the play, Barish demands the actors stage a trial indicting God because he believed that God had deserted his people. In the film, the judges held a trial and found God guilty of breaking his covenant with his chosen people. In the world today, the trial continues, with additional evidence of neglect and indifference mounting against God. How will the verdict be returned against him? I don't know. The jury's still out. That is the entirety of my paper. Thank you for letting me share it with you. Now, as I said, this is different to the other readings that I've shared on this channel. And it asks the question, is God good? Now, for the sake of the paper, and because at this point in my life, I should say that point in my life, I asked the question, is God good? And I said, I do not believe God is all good. I want your opinions. I want polite, philosophical discourse. As I said before, any hateful comments, anti-Semitic comments, and because I mentioned the war against the Ukrainians and the Russians and the war between Israel and Palestine, I do not want hateful comments against anyone. I am wanting to have polite, harmonious, if possible, philosophical discussion. So if this has intrigued you, you can go ahead and comment down below. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video, whenever that may be. Okay. Bye-bye.